Hi, everybody. I'm Cindy Curtis Nelson, and I'm a member of the HB Studio Board of Directors. Now, I'm not an actor, so please forgive me for this imperfect performance, but I'm delighted here and honored to speak with you about an organization that means so much to me, HB Studio. It's a nonprofit organization that's been adopting and evolving for over 75 years here in New York and around the world, meeting the needs of theater artists in the current moment. And in the past year, what HB Studio has done is incredible. Moving from in-person acting classes, studies, practice to the virtual world and still creating continuity, making those connections, creating incredible work that no one would have ever expected that could come out of a pandemic. And we need you more than ever to continue that work, to continue to help us grow. We're in over 36 states. We have actors tapping in from 21 countries around the world. It's amazing what's happening, and we want to continue. We want to continue with our offerings online. We want to think about and prepare for how we get back into the studio and how we can continue to meet the needs of artists as we live and grow in this new world that we live in. So please, if you can, support us today. Please consider a donation right after the show. Go to hbstudio.org/donate and give whatever you can. And it truly does matter. If it's meaningful to you, it's meaningful to us. It actually makes a difference. Come with me, be on board. I love this organization and I know you do too. So please, any gift we appreciate. And I won't keep you another minute from the show where the real actors will be in front of you. So thank you again and enjoy the performance.
Good evening. So I'm keeping you from the actors for just one more minute to say I'm Marie-Louise Stegall, president of HB Studios Board of Directors, and I am delighted to welcome you to HB Artist Spotlight CATCH-22 with Christopher Abbott, Bob Balaban, and Austin Pendleton. It is my great privilege to introduce our moderator this evening, Bob Balaban. Bob is an esteemed alumnus of HB Studio who studied with Uta Hagen. His impressive career spans stage and screen, and he is a best-selling author. Bob was producer, creator, and co-star of Robert Altman's classic Gosford Park, winning him BAFTA and SAG Awards and an Academy Award nomination. He also produced and directed HBO's Bernard and Doris, starring Susan Sarandon and Ralph Fiennes. He has received dozens of nominations for his work, including Emmys, Golden Globes, SAG Awards, PGA Awards, DGA Awards. Bob produced and directed the award-winning off-Broadway play, The Exonerated, and was nominated for a Tony Award for his performance in The Government Inspector, and has appeared in over 100 movies, including CATCH-22 with Austin Pendleton, 5 Christopher Guest movies, and 4 Wes Anderson movies. On TV, he reoccurred on Seinfeld and many other shows. Bob wrote a book about his experiences of filming Close Encounters of the Third Kind called Spielberg, Truffaut, and Me, as well as a best-selling series of children's books called McGrow. And now, please welcome Bob Balaban.
I can't see, it's so bright in here I can barely see. Okay. Can anybody hear or see me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, because I can't see a thing. Am I too bright?
You look great, Bob.
I didn't mean too smart. I just meant it's very bright in here. Well, thank you for having me here. It's very exciting to be with Austin, who I met during CATCH-22, and Christopher Abbott, who has had the interesting opportunity to be in the television multi-part series of CATCH-22 versus our measly one-time movie of the thing. And after a little bit, the three of us are going to talk about our experiences and the project itself. But to kick off this thing and start the ball rolling, Chris Abbott and Austin and I are going to, are you going to introduce us, Maria, or am I introducing Chris and Austin?
You are introducing Chris and Austin, please.
Well, they've done so many things that I can't even say one thing that they've done, or else I'd be omitting the next 150 great things. Leave it to say they're fabulous actors and let them both come and join right now. Let's have Christopher Abbott and Austin Pendleton join our Zoom world. And have you muted yourselves? Because we can see you, I believe.
I've unmuted, I think.
Yeah, unmute is what you want. Yeah.
Yeah. Unless I say, I might mute something if I don't have a good answer.
Yeah.
I wasn't even kidding. Everybody, I think Austin's been in over 200 movies and Christopher's been in 1,000 million things. And he's only been around for 3 or 4 months. He's a baby practically.
Well, thanks for saying that.
And I think to start this thing so we get to know each other a little bit, why don't we talk about, before we launch into Catch-22, let's talk about our earliest training and the thing that we would call our first breakthrough job in case we were lucky enough to have one, and I doubt we would all be here if we didn't. So who wants to go first?
Austin, you should go first.
When I was an undergraduate in college at Yale. I didn't go through the graduate school of drama there, but I wasn't. And I came into New York and there was this play about to be done. There's a long history to that, but I won't go into it. By Arthur Coppett, who died just recently, a wonderful writer and great human man, called Oh Dad, Poor Dad, Mama's Hung You in the Closet and I'm Feeling So Sad. It was directed by Jerome Robbins, the great choreographer director who had envisioned West Side Story, conceived it and saw it through, of course, and was one of the leading lights of the musical theater in Broadway. He actually took musical theater on Broadway to new places it had never been before. And sometimes it's not even, since. Anyway, I digress. He was directing it. First time he was directing a play and first time he was ever directing off Broadway. I roamed and people told me I was very right for the part. And I roamed the city going into agent's office. They said, would you submit me for this? And they said, well, and they were nice. They said, what are your credits? And I said, I described my triumphs as an undergraduate. And they very politely said, that doesn't really cut it if we're going to send you to Jerome Robbins. Finally, a friend of mine who I knew from the Williamstown Theater Festival said, I was talking to my agent today and just in the way of gossip, she said, Jerry Robbins cannot cast that role of the young son in Oh Dad, Poor, which is a very pivotal role in that play. And my friend said to her agent, I know who could play it. And then I got the part. I got the audition and I got the part. And the other two leading characters were the two great actresses, Jo Van Fleet and Barbara Harris. So we ran for a year. And it was a very hard role to sustain for a year because the character had a stutter and I had a stutter. Now, the acting didn't really affect me hardly at all. The stutter hardly affected me at all when I was acting. But if a stutterer plays a stutter, it's like truly like playing with fire.
Right.
So the year was very taxing and I never knew when I was going to be totally out of control or perfectly in control or absent of the stutter, which would also have been wrong. So in the middle of that, a wonderful actor who was also in the cast by the name of Barry Primus, I said, I just don't know what to do, Barry. He said, what he did was he gave me subway directions to HP Studio. You take this train, you take that train, you take that, you walk down this street and you audition for Uta Hagen for her class. Now I'm still teaching at HP.
Wow, an amazing connection that stayed with you your whole life and continues to.
Yeah, I studied with Uta, then I studied with Herbert, Along the way, I also studied with Bobby Lewis, which was not at HP. So 3 great teachers. But after a while, Herbert said, why don't you just teach her? You keep showing up in the classes. Why don't you just teach? So I've been teaching this past fall, it was 50 years. No, two and a half years ago was 50 years.
Was that a direct link to Fiddler? It must have been some kind of a link.
Well, yeah, even though I ultimately, after a year of the turbulence of ODAD. And I kept trying to quit ODAD, and Jerry Robbins, bless his heart, wouldn't let me. But finally, I went through careening off into a really out of control period. Finally, he acquiesced in firing me. And I thought, well, that's wonderful. I can't stand the strain anymore. I met my friends in a bar right up the street. They said, well, and I said, the only thing I'm sad about being rid of this is that, well, I'm going to miss the people. But Jerry's never going to hire me again, clearly. 6 months later, he auditioned me for Fiddler on the Roof. So yes,
Now,
that's that story.
We'll move on to Chris in 1/2 second, but because there's a wonderful story about you running into Jerome Robbins in a bar out of town while you were rehearsing Fiddler on the Roof that I've never forgotten. Can you do the short version of that, Austin? Do you even remember it?
Fiddler on the Roof, it is hard. And Hal Prince, the producer of it, only shared this with me a few years ago. We opened out of town in Detroit. We got mixed reviews. Then we got the out of town review in Variety, which is about the worst out of town review of a incoming Broadway musical I think that Variety ever wrote. It said, close it, it's hopeless. It might run for 2 months because of Zero Mostel, but no one else in it is good, and they named names. And the score is no good, the book is no good, the Robbins choreography is no good, which is downright psychotic. Just forget it. My agent called crying and saying, dear, have you heard about the Variety review? I haven't heard of anything else all day at rehearsal. People are sobbing in the dressing rooms, all that. That night after the show, there was a bar across the street in Detroit, and I went over, and the cast was in the back of the bar at the tables negotiating who was going to sleep with who that night. Because there's no aphrodisiac like being in a musical out of town that's in trouble. There's no more powerful effort. But in the front of the bar was Jerry at the bar, just standing with a drink, just kind of looking around. And I went up to him because I'd already did the other show with him, Oh Dad, Poor Dad. I had the nerve to say to Jerry, I said, Jerry, to Jerome Robbins, I said, Jerry, what are you going to do? And he said, 10 things a day. The rare occasions I've been asked to teach directing, I start with that story. And he did literally that for 3 or 4 weeks in Detroit. And somewhere in there, the show turned radiant.
What an inspiring story.
Oh, yeah.
Now, Chris, was HB your earliest acting teaching experience, or how did you come to be you?
Well, technically, yeah. I mean, I never like to poo-poo any other teachings that I've had, but I was living in Connecticut, and I was going to a community college, and I started taking a class at that community college, which I don't want to say was uninspiring, but it at least sparked something. Yeah. And then I went to, I was kind of trying to figure out my next steps. I had a few jobs that I was working while going to school there. And then I found an ad for a free audit in a backstage for HB Studio. So I took the train in, and I went to audit a class. Now I'm actually forgetting which one I audited, but then right after the audit, I kind of signed up for a few classes, and I think the first class I took was with Trudy Steibel there, and Carol Goodhart, and Karen Ludwig, and then Austin was one of my very early teachers, and I took a scene study class first, and then moved over to the Tennessee Williams master class. I always think that's a nice title. And then studied with Austin for years there. Yeah.
He would do scenes from like Schiller.
Yeah.
Translations from the German.
Yeah.
Of like Schiller.
Yeah. I was wrong for the part then.
No, but you were great in it. I said, oh, wait, he's going to do Schiller? Oh, dear. The honeymoon is about to be over, but he was great.
Yeah, one of the best notes I ever got from Austin. Well, it was more of a criticism, but it always stuck with me. Was I forgot what scene I was doing exactly, but after I thought I was great, and then after Austin said, "I don't know what you're doing up there." It's always, but it's so simple and exactly to the point, and I got it. I go, he's right. I don't like there wasn't, it was at a time where it was all kind of emotive, emotion based stuff, and but it was that simple of a direction that I kind of understood. I'm like, oh yeah, it's move the story, act on the action, and so it was very funny, but also it was honestly inspiring.
Do you continue to study?
Sorry?
Do you continue to study, whether with Austin or
I don't, but I have thought about it, but I don't now, no.
You may be a little too busy to be able to stop to study.
Well, maybe, but I genuinely mean I've thought about it. Like I think I always think it's a good idea to well, especially now not having. I was supposed to do a couple plays last year, and before that I hadn't done a play then for about a year and a half or 2 years. So, and I was kind of used to doing 1 or 2 a year. So I had been sort of out of practice anyway, and then the kind of pandemic hit, and I was supposed to do something, and then that. So now it's been some years since I've worked on theatrical material. So I've thought about it. I think it might be good.
Can you tell us a little bit about what you would consider the job that led to the most of your jobs, or that was the beginning of the onslaught?
It's hard to say a specific one, because I would say that career-wise, I sort of jumped into certain communities separately. So I would say like there was theater jobs that I think led to other theater jobs. Then there was like independent film jobs that led to more of those, and then TV or whatever. So I would say for theater, I was the first play I did was directed by Scott Ellis the first legit play I did. I had done a few plays like there's EST, and then there's also a theater above it. So I did a play there, before. But my first legit play was a play called Good Boys and True that Scott Ellis directed. So I would say that was like my first dive into like pretty professiontional theater. And then I kind of done a run of plays one at the New Group right after that, and a bunch of off Broadway, and then eventually in like 2011 I did my first Broadway in House of Blue Leaves, with David Cromer.
Yeah,
yeah.
He's a director, don't you think?
What's that?
He's a wonderful director.
I love David. Yeah, I love working with him. And then independent film kind of happens on a separate trajectory. So, but I would say that play with Scott Ellis kind of really launched it a little bit, because before that while I was going to HB, I was just going to a bunch of EPA equity kind of like cattle call auditions as a non-equity member, and that's how I was trying to kind of get my foot in the door.
Well, I think what people who aren't actors probably don't realize this. But the key to everything is doing something that people want to go see, and they have to notice you in some way. And a play is literally, although sometimes people get cast in terrific parts in movies just out of nowhere because somebody's walking down the street and sees them. But I think for all of us, mine was You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown. I was going to NYU at the time, and my eventual wife said to me, I read in Backstage in Show Business that they're looking for somebody to play the characters in Charlie Brown, and the only requirement is you have to sing and you have to be short. So I went, and it became very popular, and all of a sudden casting directors I was on the map as a young person who could do certain things and would have, and really nobody would have noticed, I suppose any of us, but for the fact that we did something and it tended to be in theater, because that's the easiest thing to get into if you haven't that much experience and they need somebody youthful.
Right. Exactly.
So I told my story, I zipped it into your story. And I think maybe now we could talk about this thing that has brought us together tonight, which is the book, although none of us were in the book because it was a book, of Catch-22. Austin and I think we met for the first time on
Yes.
Catch-22.
Your reputation had preceded you to me, but yes.
Well, yours as well, because your wife to be was friendly with my wife to be.
Mhm.
We all remember they were guides at Lincoln Center.
Yeah, they were two, yeah.
And I was so lonely on Catch-22. I remember I'd been sitting around for weeks doing nothing. I was on a dock somewhere and I noticed you on the pier. I don't know if you were going to jump off or what.
Probably, yeah.
And ran over to you and I said, I think we better start talking to each other because there's nobody else here that we can talk to right now. And our long friendship and everything has started there. And Chris, how is it that you came to be in Catch-22 yourself?
I got a call about it and I auditioned. It was to audition with George Clooney, who directed it, and Grant Heslov, his partner, business partner. And I had seen the film some years prior, but I actually had never read the book. I'm pretty sure it was assigned to me to read in high school, but I shouldn't have been held responsible for any sort of assignments back then. So I tried to quickly start kind of reading the book because I read the scripts first, obviously, and I really liked them, and I just tried to prepare the hell out of the audition, and I had the audition. It went great, and then I got a call that I was going to do it.
You might have at that point avoided reading the book, not to be confined to the character in the book, but at what point did you actually read the book, or did you?
I did. Well, I read it. I read it in the interim, kind of between auditioning and actually doing it, because there was about a few months in between. Now, I think you're right that I don't think it important. I thought it important to read it just for to kind of know the world and know the tone, but I had made the decision early on that I couldn't play the book. I had to play the script.
Yeah. Who wrote the screenplay?
Oh my gosh, he's a friend of mine, and I'm blanking on his name. Oh my god.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. It'll come back to you. Yeah.
It'll come to me in a second. But
It was a terrific script.
It was a great script, but I was like, it's going to be a trap to try to play the book.
Yeah,
or try, you know what I mean? It would have been too convoluted to try to, So I just had it, I read it, and then I just kind of put it away, and I was like, all right, now do the scripts as is, not as if they were fresh, but try to kind of forget the context or the ideas that you got from reading the book.
Well, I think you and your show there were relieved of a great burden, because when Austin and I did Catch-22, it was in the middle of being at the top of the bestsellers list for years, and people in it would run around quoting the book. And
it was sort of the defining novel of the entire decade of the 60s.
Right.
It came out right at the beginning of the 60s. It remained, just as Bob said, intensely in vogue, and the film was made in 1969. So that the decade of the 60s, it was the book. I don't remember an equivalent to that in any succeeding one of the decades.
But it was in curriculum also, like for a lot of schools years later. So I mean, I learned that the fans of the book not only stayed true like fans, but the fan base grew over the years, and also. But
it's very, very difficult to be in a movie and play characters that everybody has been reading about for years and years.
Yeah, right.
Knows how they look like in their mind, knows how they talk. It was, I think, quite a challenge. I thought, and Austin, we were talking about this before, that it was a great burden. And MASH coming out 6 months before Catch-22 did sort of, for a lot of people, supplied a bit of the vision that they thought Catch-22 was going to have, the craziness of it, because of Robert Altman's multiple amazing skills as a director.
Yeah,
Do
yeah.
you want to take a sidebar and do a little diversion into you and how you were almost in MASH instead of Catch-22, or should we avoid that for now?
Well, I was offered a part in MASH just before I went down for Catch-22, before I went down to Mexico to work my 2 weeks with Orson Welles on, because I was only in the scenes he was in Catch-22. And I had a wonderful time with Robert Altman in the audition. And then I was offered the part of Radar, no less. And I turned it down.
Well,
Because I thought, no, I'm going to be in the really epic version of the same kind of movie, Catch-22. And I don't want to undercut it by also being in MASH, which was pleasant enough. And it's certainly an enjoyable director whom I'd never heard of before, Altman, but enjoyable to meet. All very pleasant, but I didn't want to complicate my appearance for which the world was not waiting in Catch-22. So I turned it down, and I was then urged to take it by someone on the set of Catch-22, Suzanne Benton. She said, you've got to work with Robert Altman. And I frantically tried to get back in it, having turned it down, and they'd already cast it.
But you did make up with Robert Altman about 40 years later.
Yes, Altman was angry at me. I mean, like, he told me he was angry at me. And I thought, well, now I blew ever working with Robert Altman again, who was practically my favorite director's work all through the 70s and 80s and all that. But then at least thanks to you, Bob.
Thank you.
Directly thanks to you. You forged a reunion between us at a party after a screening of the Gosford Park you did with Altman, and all harmonies was restored.
But had he lived much longer, he probably would have cast you in something. But
Yeah,
he didn't. He died not that long after you met him.
yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Now, Chris, you want to talk a little bit about? I'm sorry.
Luke Davies. It just came to my mind.
Luke, yeah,
Luke Davies
wow.
and David Michaud, who wrote the scripts. Sorry.
Oh, wow.
Do you feel better now, Chris?
I do. Because I'm friends with him, and it's just one of those. I was thinking the name Ben, and I don't know why.
Well, when the wrong name gets in your head, it's very hard to get rid of it.
Yeah.
Well, talk to me a little bit about what it was like doing the series. You had 6 episodes, I think.
Mm-hmm.
What was your experience like?
Well, it was incredibly exciting leading up to it. You know, it was a prominent leading role and layered and a mix of, very heightened drama and sort of absurdist comedy. I was going to get to do a lot of things.
If anybody doesn't know this, you were Yossarian, which is that's
the Scarlett O'Hara of Catch-22. Yeah, exactly. That's the part. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the one. And we were going to shoot in Italy. We shot it in Italy, which was amazing for, over a period of about 4 months. So it was going to be a real project. And it's continues to be one of the more memorable experiences I've ever had, because of getting to work on material that was so good and work with people that I admired, and it was amazing. But it was one of the most difficult jobs I ever had in the same breath. I didn't no days off, and we had cross-boarded all the episodes. So
anybody who doesn't know what that means, I'll jump in and say cross-boarding means you go by location. So one day you'll go to a tent that's supposed to be Driedel's tent or whoever's tent it is, and you do all the scenes from all the 6 episodes where your character is in that tent. You do them out of order in one day. It's very challenging.
Yeah.
So we did. I was just kind of bopping around from episode to episode, and the episodes were kind of split up between 3 directors: George Clooney, Grant Heslov, Ellen Kuras. So I would kind of also essentially then bop around between directors, although everyone was kind of there all day, every day anyway. and on top of that, I have anxiety and I was having trouble sleeping, and so it was a beautiful experience, but also one of the more difficult ones. Yeah.
Well, and you had, and it's interesting being directed, as anybody knows who's been on a series for a while, by different directors, one of whose jobs is to make sure that the episodes all look like they were directed by the same person.
Mm-hmm.
That's often pulled together by the director of photography, isn't it?
Yeah.
A lot. And usually at the beginning of these things, and God knows everyone is different, the directors sit down and have a tone meeting. And I thought,
Yeah.
is it going to be harsh? Is it going to be happy? That was not the tone meeting. The tone meeting is things like, don't do close-ups of that actor because he twitches when the camera comes near him. We like walking shots, but we don't like to do running shots. They give you the kind of rule of the show, although I imagine with somebody as creative as George in charge, it never got reduced to that kind of babble.
No.
But it's hard to remain consistent in these.
Well, and I think especially with CATCH-22, because it's tonally, it's one part absurdist, one part dire and dramatic. So it's tonally you can kind of go in many directions in any sort of adaptation of it. Whether you lean more into the comedy, whether you lean more into the, I guess drama, for lack of a better word. It's hard.
Well, the movie itself is somewhat, and Austin, correct me if I'm incorrect, it's somewhat begins humorous and eventually becomes more and more serious towards the end with Nate Lee's horror and a lot of scenes in Rome.
That's right.
Because it had to tell the story in 1 2-hour period. You having the luxury of 5 hours, how did your scenes modulate? Did the first episode begin as if it were a comedy, and over the hours, did it get more serious? How did that work? Are we frozen? I can't tell. Or was it?
No, he's thinking.
Oh, was that for me, or I thought that was?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Yes, Chris. Yes. I can take it back if you like.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were asking Austin about your. Oh no, sorry. I should have just said I was frozen.
No, I can't see very well. It's very bright in my eyes, and all I see. I thought you'd frozen.
No, sorry.
Talking about how the trajectory of your 6 episodes went. Did you have comedy and tragedy in every episode?
Yeah, well, I think again, I thought, well, how am I going to get through this? And I thought the way to do it is to not worry about it. Just essentially try to play.
Yeah, that's
try to play the truth of it, no matter what, and essentially the writing will take care of whether it's found funny or whether it's found serious. Like obviously, there was also. I wouldn't try to be funny in a scene that was clearly meant to be dramatic, but yeah, I would just not. I had to take that out of my head, because otherwise I would just succumb to playing an idea.
That's one of the best acting lessons I've ever heard. What Chris just said for the last minute and a half.
I second the motion.
Yes.
Austin, you had a scene in CATCH-22, which was a pretty important scene with Orson Welles.
Every scene that I had also involved Orson Welles.
Lucky for you.
Mm-hmm.
But if you feel like it, I was in the scene that you were in with Orson, but I was with a bunch of guys who were in the Army, and we just watched you in our tent. We didn't have to interact. But I used to sit outside the tent watching your close-ups, because we weren't required for close-ups. It was just you and Orson. And watch it appeared to be agony, although it was all very talented and wonderful. Do you want to talk a little bit about what it was like for you?
Well, Orson, I will briefly take you through my journey with Orson, because the film was for me much more a journey with Orson than it was a journey with Mike. I'd already worked with Mike in a stage production. I'd acted for him in the Little Foxes at Lincoln Center. And that was fascinating. And then soon after that, he just offered me CATCH-22. And Mike was in distress. He was weeks after he had announced that he was giving birth to a stillborn child or whatever. And that feeling, I guess, was only intensifying.
Mike's description of the movie as he watched it the first few days of shooting on dailies. It wasn't something that really happened in his life with a real baby.
No, no. Oh, right, right. Of course, that was his metaphor. Yes. And he was getting more and more frustrated. Everybody was getting more and more frustrated. And then enter Orson. And we would rehearse the scenes with Orson. We would sit outside, in our high chairs, in the desert, and wait for those scenes to be lit. Then when we came back and we're just about to shoot the scene, whether it was only me and Orson and Suzanne Benton, or whether it was the group, but each scene primaried Orson. I'm using the word primary as a verb in the wrong sense anyway. A primary character in each of those scenes was Orson. Orson then, just before the first shot was going to be actually shot, it had been lit for the last couple of hours. It was being lit. Now it's going to actually be shot. Would then redirect the scene and literally announce that if it were not played the way he wanted it to be played, he would just blow lines. Or he would say, if it veered from what he had directed, he would start blowing lines. And then he would say, well, he said about a scene with me to Mike afterwards, I don't usually blow lines. I don't know why this is happening. I don't usually blow lines. It must be that there's something wrong with the scene. I don't think it's anything I'm doing. And at one point, Mike responded to this by saying, well, Orson, you know it's wrong, and I know it's wrong, but who are we against Pendleton? And that sort of bewildered him long enough that we were able to get a good take. He was furious that he was not directing the movie. He had been obsessed with directing Catch-22 since the book came out for the last 8 years or something. And here this upstart Mike, you should have heard, well, you probably did hear him when we all sit outside, the arias he would go on tearing apart Stanley Kubrick. Yeah. Oh my God. They were harrowing. I mean, he would operatically go on about what total fraud Stanley Kubrick was.
But we have to remember how in awe the world was at that point of Orson Welles, let alone Mike Nichols, for whom Orson was his kind of god, wouldn't you say? Wasn't he terrified of him?
Well, I don't think he came into it terrified, but Orson proceeded to terrify him, to render these scenes that were brilliantly written, but half as funny as the scenes themselves were, or as Mike had directed them to be played. Those were twice as funny as what ended up on the film. They add up, all the scenes with Orson and therefore Orson and me, to about 25 minutes in the whole film. But they're very critical scenes in terms of the thing you're talking about, Chris, the tone of the whole movie. Mm-hmm. They carry the heavy weight of some of the really absurdist scenes. They were flat under the guiding hand of Orson. Now, a lot of the press came down during those 2 weeks because the film was so anticipated and everybody wanted to write articles about it on the set. People like Nora Ephron. That's how I met her.
Me too.
And and she and I would talk, and I would talk to other journalists, as would all of the rest of y'all. And even right during that time, and certainly by the time the film opened, a year and a half later, I was quoted with all these smart-ass remarks about Orson.
Oh God!
And they, including, "I will miss him, such is the perversity of human nature," and stuff like that. It's about Orson Welles. And Alan Arkin, who was playing the part that you're playing now, Chris, would say, "I don't get it. Citizen Kane and a few good camera angles, and he's deified." And the talk was sort of like that.
Wow.
And then, but so that fall, this was in the early part of '69, I started going, we had revival houses, film houses all over the place in New York then. I just started out of curiosity going to all the Orson Welles films I'd never seen, like everything other than Citizen Kane. I saw The Magnificent Ambersons. I saw A Touch of Evil. I saw the Shakespearean films, and I thought, pardon the expression, holy shit. I would be bitter too. These are Magnificent Ambersons, I think, is, despite certain flaws, superior to Citizen Kane and Touch of Evil. These are masterpieces. And then he got a bit self-destructive about them, but still. So I walked around in a pall of guilt for years and years and years. So then when Judith Aubergenois asked me to write a play in which Orson would be one of the characters, Orson Shadow, I thought, this is a chance to make it up to Orson, even though by that time he had been dead for 25 years, and try to portray the world from Orson's point of view. I was so guilty that I'd said all that crap about him to the press and quoted, because my quotes were juicy. I was really being a smart aleck.
But how nice that you own up to this. And by the way, how brilliant your play was. I mean, Chris, were you guys friends yet at that point? Did you go to see the play when it came to New York?
I had moved to New York. No, well, it was around the same time because Orson's Shadow was produced, was it 2005?
2005 at the Barrow Street Theater, yeah.
At the Barrow Street. I hadn't started studying with Austin yet, but I moved to New York around 2006, 2007.
Yeah.
So I kind of just missed it, but I had,
It played the sort of exact year of 2005.
Right. The ripples of it still.
What?
I said the ripples of it still were spreading around New York when I moved there.
Yeah.
Well, how about you, Chris? During the filming of your 6 episodes, did you ultimately feel that it was a real challenge? It was very challenging to translate the book Catch-22 into a series, because in some ways, when I think about it, it's nice that you had 5 hours, because to try to compress that kaleidoscope of a book into a single movie, I think, and I think Austin may agree with me, is a really difficult task. How did you feel that the book reflected the movie or didn't reflect the movie?
Well, I'll say this. I thought, I honestly think both the Nichols version and our version, I think you guys given what, just under 2 hours?
Yeah.
And the mini series being about 4.5. There's still way too much that is left out there. It's impossible. I think it's impossible to get everything that encapsulates in the book. And I think that's why, maybe some of the diehard fans of the book, the novel Catch-22, there's always going to be something that they're upset about, you know what I mean? Because something is missing that they hold dear, but there's so many darlings that you need to kill to make it filmable.
Yeah, totally.
And generally speaking, I do think that it's hard. I think it's very hard to adapt a great book, more so than a mediocre book. I think a mediocre book is much more filmable. You know what I mean? And like you were touching on before, Bob, I think that, in a book, and by the time I did it, a book that had now been around for decades, and there was, very tried and true fans of it, that everyone has their idea in their head of these characters, and the budget in their head is insurmountable.
Right.
So it's hard. I don't know if it's hard to make everybody happy in that sense, but I do think in the end I do think we did a really beautiful job.
Yeah, I thought so too. And oddly enough, the movie Catch-22, I don't know if we said this time around, has grown over the years to be more critically acceptable. And
Yeah.
Mike, who had been despondent when he saw the first rushes and declared it a stillborn child, came to, I think, believe to be a lot happier about it. He had had his first 2 movies, as you know, Catch-20.
It haunted him all his life, literally. I mean, he was aware that generation by new generation. See, the film opened with another liability. By that point, Mike had directed either 4 or 5 Broadway hits. Every play he'd directed had been in one way or another a hit.
Oh, I think he won every Tony for years.
Yeah, just about. And his first two films were huge hits. Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf and The Graduate. In fact, The Graduate was a phenomenal hit. Everything he touched turned to gold, so people had a physical ache for him to have a flop. I mean, I went to an industry screening of it in a theater, you know, a whole theater. It's full of industry or industry-related people. I'll never forget this. The credits came on at the beginning. Of course, the way the credits are shot in that movie is extraordinary. But anyway, the halfway through the credits, it said Orson Welles. The house erupted in cheers. And then the very last credit was shown. It said directed by Mike Nichols. And here's what the audience did. And the movie hadn't even started yet. I mean, it was poisonous. And it was like boy, did they want him to have a flop with this. And he can, that's just the way they are in this business. We all know that.
Yeah.
But I've never seen a more chilling. That they were announcing that they were not going to buy this film.
Right.
And you almost slid down in your seat, particularly if you were in it. But just for Mike. And so that night, Katina and I got home, and so I called Mike, and he was up in the country, and he said, "Hello," like that. I said, "It's Austin. I saw the movie." He said, "Well, it was like that." I said, I'm Mike, I think I don't want to throw words around, but I think it's a masterpiece, which I do. And he said, "Really?" I couldn't cheer him up. He said, "I think we're going to get a good review from Canby," which it did in the Times, you know, but like all the good reviews in the world, and there were not all the good reviews in the world for that film. Some of the reviews were savage, even from critics who were sympathetic to Mike Nichols. And it was at first, so first of all, when you have your first flop, quote unquote flop, and it happens to be an adaptation of the most popular work of literature of the era, and it's as visible a flop as that, and you haven't been inoculated into flopdom yet by anything else, it's shattering. And he for quite a long time, he was incredibly upset by all that. But he was still haunted by it when I had lunch with him in 2011, which was 40 years later or something. He was still, we got to talk about we've got to talk about CATCH-22 someday. It was still, yes, he was aware that over the generations, it developed much more of a reputation. In fact, it sort of became the cool movie to like about 20 or 30 years later.
And part of it was the burden of the book was relieved. Not that it's not famous, but it wasn't the immediate thing on your mind all the time.
But also the drama of Mike Nichols, the Unstoppable, was long gone by then. I mean, like everybody whoever directed films or anything, after all that, some of his films were great and some were not. Not one of them was stupid, but some were great and some were not quite great. So all that the hysteria around Mike Nichols, the Unstoppable, had stopped.
You could just watch the movie without an over.
Yeah, without, I hope he gets it this time. I mean, that was all gone.
Wow. Well, I wonder if anything on your set, Chris, equaled any of the stuff on our set in terms of oddness. Mike in the beginning was beautifully focused, as he was all the time, on the movie. And I don't know if you remember this, Austin, but one of the things about the movie was Mike, after about 2 weeks of shooting, woke up one night and said, "Wait a minute, this is Yossarian's dream. I've got all these scenes with extras in the movie, like in the mess hall, there were like 400 people. In a dream, you don't remember extras." And we went back and reshot anything that we had done that had extras in it, which was kind of brilliant of Mike to figure it out.
Yeah.
The movie was already one of the more expensive movies that had been made that decade, and it to me was just evidence of the fact that Mike,
Where was yours shot?
it was in a very far away part of Mexico called Guaymas, Mexico, which had 2 hotels and great shrimp, and that was it. And we stayed there forever and ever.
And and the people who were there, I was spared. I was only there, as I say, for 2 weeks. And this is the only time I made a film this has ever happened. I came back to New York, and for 2 weeks, I had a pounding headache. I mean, I had to keep taking headache pills because the tension created by Orson, on top of the tension that was already on the set, and the fact that we weren't filming it in Philadelphia where we could hop on a train and go somewhere, was so relentless. The unhappiness of the cast and of Mike and of Buck Henry, who wrote it, the script, was so palpable that I didn't get the headache until I landed in New York.
Well, Chris, are you tiptoeing back to work now that the pandemic is momentarily giving us the ability to possibly work?
Tiptoeing, I think, is the right term. Yeah.
And
Yeah, I'm waiting. There's a lot of things in the air. Yeah.
there should be.
Yeah.
And also, Austin, theater-wise, are you having any thoughts of anything in a live performance coming up? Or do you
Well, the first acting job that I have lined up is in early August, I go to Cleveland and stay for a couple of months with my brother and his wife and act there in a theater in Broadway Bound by Neil Simon.
Wow.
I play the grandfather who's a communist, which is a brilliant play, by the way. I've already started learning it.
You go back for this is a regular thing for you to do, to get to be with your family and be in that theater, am I right?
Yeah, well, 2 years ago, I went and acted at the same, it'll be 3 years, no, it'll be 2 years by the time I go, and acted in Glengarry Glen Ross.
Wow.
And then a few years before that, I went to the Cleveland Playhouse, where my mother had started a career as an actress, and directed a play by Rebecca Gilman. And again, I stayed with my brother and his wife.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, I think it is just about getting to be the time that we're going to, now, Marie, you can break in if you're watching us and say, no, go on, talk about Catch-22 some more, and I can talk to you about the 2 people that died during the making of the movie. Or we can go ahead and come back and have a discussion a little bit with some of the people who are watching us. Marie, if you're listening, come to my aid and tell me what to do.
Thank you, Bob. I do think that it's about time to wrap up. I don't know if you have a last question to ask of Austin and Chris to just sort of put a pin on it, or we can call it an evening.
Well, I'm afraid to start any new topics because there's so many things we could actually start talking about. We would never get out of here.
There was one sentence I didn't say about the Fiddler on the Roof thing, and Hal Prince only told me this a few years ago. Because of Hal was going to raise the rest of the money once we'd opened Detroit, and everybody when the Variety Review came out, no one would give him a dime. Fiddler on the Roof came this close to closing in Detroit.
Wow.
That gives you some idea of this profession.
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you have an urge to say, literally about anything, including anything?
Me? No, well, we'll continue on, I guess, in another zone, right? Is that what's happening?
Yeah, we're going to have a little bit of, well, thank us all. And thank you, Marie. And
Thanks,
tell us,
Scott.
and now I think we're going to disappear and sign back in a new kind of way.
All right. Well, thank you, Bob, Chris, and Austin. This was really amazing. The insights were fantastic, really enjoyable. And thank you to everybody watching, all our students, faculty, and all the wonderful supporters. And please don't forget that your tax-deductible donation, which you can make very easily at hbstudio.org/donate, that will ensure that we can continue to bring programs like this to everybody for free. So thank you all, and we wish you a lovely night. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Come back.
Bye.